Thank you for joining us today for our Leading Voices program. And thank you, Dr. Sasha Larsen Akins, for being our guest speaker today. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce Dr. Akins. She grew up in San Diego and she graduated in Pacific in 2009 and 2011, studying biological sciences, receiving a bachelor's degree and also a master's degree. During her time at Pacific, she played in field hockey, so she was one of our stellar student athletes. She worked with Professors Joan Lynn Sarangino and Jeff Lynn Sarangino on a variety of research projects. Dr. Akins received her Ph.D. in Emerging Infectious Diseases from the Uniformed Services University at the Health Sciences in Bethesda, Maryland. In 2016, she joined Dr. Ria Kohler's lab in Seattle, Washington, and they are now working within Seattle Children's Research Institute in the Center for Global Infectious Disease Research. Very timely for what we're all experiencing now. So Dr. Akins' work has led to lots of continuity for experiencing new challenges, including the one that we're going to hear about today, the work on one of the Moderna vaccine trials. So after getting so many questions about the COVID-19 vaccine, Dr. Larsen Akins has taken to social media to answer questions on her Instagram account. So we're going to just go ahead and get started. I know there's a lot of participants, a lot of interest, and we're going to start with a few questions for Dr. Akins, and then we will open up for questions from our students, our faculty, our staff, and alumni. So let's get started. So, Dr. Akins, you are a Pacific grad, and it would be great to hear from you about how your experience at Pacific has shaped your journey and where you are today.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I think that some of the essential qualities and things I learned at Pacific were a love of learning. Obviously, I was in school for quite a long time for a PhD. The diversity of learning also was really something that Pacific impressed upon us as student athletes. And the collaborative research environment was also very essential for kind of my career path. Dr. Lynn Sarangino both were exceptional mentors and really let me drive interesting ideas, try new things, and I think that set me on an exceptional path to go on for my PhD in immunology. I think that the smaller learning environment at Pacific allowed me to be a successful student athlete. You know, oftentimes we were out of state taking exams, rereading lectures, re-seeing things, and really having to keep up on our time management. So I think Pacific really helped me train to manage my time well and think outside the box.
Thank you. So it's unusual sometimes, I think, for a student athlete to actually pursue a major biological sciences or any kind of STEM major where there are so many requirements for labs and so many cohorted classes, etc. Mm-hmm. So could you talk to us a little bit about what led you to that decision?
Sure. So I have a sister who's 13 years younger, and so I really wanted to be a pediatric delivery nurse for a very long time, and then had literally an epiphany that I could be a doctor. So then I really wanted to be a physician, even before coming to Pacific. And athletics was really my gateway to university, to higher ed. And so I think that I always knew I wanted to be in biological sciences, and again, that pre-planning out your schedule, knowing that fall was our intensive period of athletics and trying to backload those major lab classes in spring. I'll also say though that the science community of instructors and professors was incredibly understanding. You know, I wasn't the first student athlete to come through the door. I had several instructors re-give lectures or give me one-on-one time to go over things that I had missed. But a lot of that came because I, in advance, told them when I would be gone, let them know exactly what I would need and kind of identify the spaces where I would need extra help or help addressing things that I might have missed. So I think that it was a combination of, sticking to my guns on biology, but also preparing everybody for what I would need to remain and be successful.
Thank you, Sasha. And I think that just describes so beautifully what our Pacific faculty are known to do, is to make education personalized, to adjust where they can, and basically just to help our students pursue their dreams, which for you was doing athletics and playing field hockey. You were doing other things. So you you received your bachelor's degree, and then you decided to go to grad school. Why grad school?
Sure. So as I mentioned, a lot of time on the field hockey field, not a lot of time to really get in lab and experience lab work outside of a class, which is really, I think laboratory work in the context of a classroom is essential and very critical, but it's a really basic foundation. If you're going to pursue a career in sciences and research, I think it was important for me to understand what I was getting into and really have a better idea of what I wanted and where I wanted to go. I think by my senior year, I was pretty sure I didn't want to be a physician. I was more interested in heavy research and bench sciences. And so I took the time in my master's degree to really focus and decide if that was indeed what I wanted to do. And I, during undergrad, really focused heavily on field work and field sciences, environmental studies. And so during my master's work, it was much more laboratory molecular sciences. So I had also a nice diversity of experiences that I could weigh and say, this is what really interests me, and this is that. And so I think that master's time was my time to really decide and make a choice about where I wanted to go and what kind of program I wanted to look for in a Ph.D. that was more tailored to my interests, which were infectious diseases.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So you mentioned, the close faculty interactions. Are there any special relationships you maintain today with some of your faculty?
Sure. So one of my best friends and teammates from athletics, Danielle Mount-Kelly, actually stayed on for a long time in the athletic department. So I got to come visit her when she had her first baby, Jackson. And it was so thrilling. I'm telling you, thrilling to walk across campus and walk into different offices and say, oh, hello. And really, it was so fantastic. I do get to email with Joan and Jeff maybe once a year, kind of keep up, usually around Christmas time, keeping up and checking in with each other, how we're doing. There have been several times when I think of them and the work that they do in the context of some of the industry work that we collaborate with here, and how I try and send people their way. These are good people, you should know. They do incredible work as far as protein expression. And so I think that Joan and Jeff are probably my closest relationship, and that's very natural in terms of a mentor-mentee relationship.
And I think they still do that today. So okay, so a lot of the work, Sasha, that you've done in the past was actually centered on vaccines against tuberculosis, right?
Right.
I'd like to just kind of explore how the foundation for some of that work has led you to what you're doing today, and
Sure.
particularly the pandemic response. So can you talk a little bit about your work with the vaccines against TB and how they prepared you for work in this pandemic?
Sure. So my PhD was human immunology, and I wanted to choose a postdoc where I got more preclinical and model design experience, and I wanted to work for a successful woman who had a family and had kind of that background. And I found Dr. Kohler in Seattle, and I joined her team. And the mission of our work is to really accelerate and advance novel candidates for tuberculosis vaccines. The only licensed vaccine currently is BCG, and it's given to infants in endemic regions. So the United States does not use it because we prefer to retain surveillance capacity. But what we do is we screen in preclinical models novel vaccine candidates as well, and we have a separate arm that runs clinical trials for these same candidates to advance through. So it's really the full spectrum of what you'd want in a product to make it to the shelves. And so when you think about translating kind of that idea to the pandemic response, we had the infrastructure and partnerships with several local community researchers, including Kaiser Permanente of Washington, and we formed what's called a VTU, which had already evaluated several other vaccine candidates, including flu vaccine candidates. So the infrastructure was there to quickly set up this trial and run it, and it was also a huge kudos to the volunteers in this phase 1 study for Moderna. It's not easy to volunteer for something so new and different, but they had thousands of people apply to participate in this trial, which began with 45 people. So we knew we were going to be successful as far as enrollment. But I think that the relationships we had across preclinical and clinical pipeline activities within our team as well as across teams and other institutes is really what laid the foundation for this fast Moderna phase 1 clinical trial. And understanding what are the things you're looking for, what are the endpoints you're looking for, both as a preclinical candidate as well as far as clinical endpoints. What are the key things we need to look for, and how fast can we get them? Really, is all the things we do in tuberculosis as well.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously in all of these types of projects, there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of infrastructure and networking that needs to be set up. Can you talk to us a little bit, Sasha, about what some of your personal skills that you were able to apply to get to where you are here, going from TB to Moderna? What did your background teach you?
Sure. So I think that there's several aspects of my career that set us up for success. I think being a little more type A, I'm very focused on time management, and it's also a respect for time management, a respect for people's time, and knowing that there was so much intensity around this particular trial, just to relax and focus and know you were the right person for the job. So having some, self-assurance in those moments, which also came all the way down the chain from Seattle Children's. Everyone was incredibly proud and set us up for success. So I think identifying people who are your advocates is really important, because in times when you have low moments or you really need help or you need something, those people are the people you lean on. Time management, I said, and I think that knowing what you don't know is also very important. So knowing when to ask the questions in advance, right? Not getting in a situation where you're stuck in a bad moment where you have no fix. Thinking in advance, and a lot of that also came with our partnership with Kaiser Permanente Washington, having those meetings ahead of time, really working out all of the details. So I think a lot of those personality traits maybe I have are what helped us be successful in this particular trial in this setting, which was thrilling, but very a high anxiety as well, right? So it was definitely a balance.
Yeah. You have lived a life of balance, because I know you have a family. Yeah. You've talked about time management, which is always critical, whether one has a family or not when one is working. So you mentioned also that you looked for a mentor that was successful woman scientist. So what other things do you look for in terms of mentors, for example? And
Absolutely.
how has that played a role in your life? You've talked a little bit about that already, but what's important for as a mentor?
You really want to find someone who's going to be your advocate and see you see your common success as success. I think that I've had a string of several exceptional mentors. So starting with Joan and Jeff at Pacific, going on to Dr. Andrew Snow at USU. He was a relatively junior faculty, but really let me think and was my advocate and encouraged me in all of my new ideas. Dr. Kohler has just been the cherry on top so far. So anytime I go to her with, I need this thing, or I think I need this for my career development, I think this is going to help us and our team long term, it's always a yes. It's always, let's go for it. So what I look for in a mentor is someone who has the time to give me those moments of advocacy and help my career advancement. But I also try and look for positive people who are in general optimists, because there are some low moments in science when you definitely need to turn the page and regroup, whether your hypothesis was incorrect or you made a big blunder. You need those people around you who are going to pick you back up, much like a team, right? So I think that comes from a lot of my athletic experiences, knowing that you're not going to win every game, knowing that you're not going to win every experiment, is part of the game you're playing, right? Your agreement to play and agreement to enjoy science. So I think that looking for mentors who can pick you back up in those low moments is also very critical. So I'd say an optimist and people who are going to be advocates for you.
Thanks, Sasha. It also sounds like you are looking for people that are empathetic, right? Mentors who are empathetic, who have some level of understanding, or at least try to have an understanding of the situation that you're in, whether it's work or it's family or other. And I think that's so important, particularly for women in science, who are often just juggling. I won't say more than men in science these days, but I think the reality is women do juggle a lot more than men.
It's different, and it's different, and it's not universal, right? But in general, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that in all stages of my career, I've had something else going on outside of the bench. So during my time with Joan and Jeff, I also worked at the San Joaquin Mosquito Vector Control District as part of the West Nile virus surveillance team. And then when I was at USU, I was also coaching high school field hockey with my former teammate Liz at TC Williams. Here, right now in this space, I have a 2-year-old. And so I totally agree with that point that having the mentor who understands you have other obligations, but still trusts you to do your job and doesn't micromanage you through it, but genuinely trusts you to do your job and is invested in your other aspects. Mm-hmm. So we call Rhea Auntie Rhea. She loves all of our kids. And so invested in you as a whole human and not just invested in you as the employee is definitely something to look for in a mentor.
Yes, totally agree. And I'm just so glad that you found that at Pacific when you were just starting out with people who were invested in you as a whole person. And I think that's just so true of what Pacific does. It is the whole person that everybody cares about, whether it's a faculty member or a staff or a coach or whoever. So you're doing a lot of talking on social media about COVID vaccines. I know you have an Instagram account and you're doing other types of communications. What are some common questions that you're?
Sure. So the most common is safety. Is this safe? And particularly around the mRNA vaccine. So the Pfizer, BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccines, is it safe? What are the ingredients? I've heard this, I've heard that. What can we expect as far as rollout? When is it going to be my turn? How come this is difficult? Can we really trust the information we're seeing? But I'd say the very top question I receive is about safety.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns with regards to everything around COVID. And so all aspects of COVID. So I'm sure you're able to respond to some of those questions as well as we all learn more about what COVID is and how to deal with it. So so you talked a lot about mentorship in your life. And we talked about how it actually started at Pacific with some of your faculty, or maybe you had some great mentorship in high school as well, which you probably did since you were doing field hockey in high school, undoubtedly. But what advice would you give to our current students, whether they're pursuing, degrees in sciences or just advice to students in general?
Sure. So I think that coaching really helped me with this as well, coaching other student athletes. I think I'm going to harp on it again, but time management is really important, and respect for people's time, both your time and other people's time. So if you need an advocate, you need help. A really important thing to do for your advocate is identify where the last step you got to and what's the jump you need from them, not just coming in and saying, I'm lost. right? I don't understand, I don't get it. Instead of saying, I'm understanding to this point, and I need your help coming from here to the next point, which either I don't understand or I don't know where to go from here. Because that sets your mentor or advocate up for success, right? You've already identified the solution, and now they just have to execute it. So I think that's one huge piece of advice I'd give for students and student athletes, that if you can identify the last step you understand, it's very much easier for people who have a zillion time commitments to hop in right at that moment and help you there. And I think finding a support system is also critical, whether that be your fellow students or other instructors. Again, those people who can pick you up in low moments and help you get right back in, and not feel defeated, because everybody has low moments, and everyone comes to a point in the process they don't understand. So it's completely natural. So understand that that's expected, and you're bringing an expected problem to these people who can help you. So those are the two things I'd like to pass to students at Pacific.
Thank you. Any specific advice for athletes?
Time management. Time management. Get good sleep. Yeah, I know you're doing a job on the field, on the court, in the pool, but at the end, not many of us go pro, and it's important to come away with a quality education and know what you're going to do after graduation. But the skills you're learning as a student athlete will serve you forever, and draw those parallels and find the strengths in your teammates, your coworkers, lean on them in those moments, and identify who can help you where. It's just like a team. You know, you have specialists in everything. Same thing in science, we have specialists. I have fantastic colleagues, formulation scientists, virologists, microbiologists. I don't know everything, right? They teach me things all the time, but they're also my terrific friends. And so just like teammates, science, other fields, it's all teams, right? And so identifying the team that will help you achieve what you want to achieve, I think is critical.
Thank you. That's wonderful advice, because none of us know everything. We're always dependent upon other people. And in some fields, particularly like in science, there's so much uncertainty, right? That, sometimes I know when I was doing science, you felt like, oh, I was pursuing this particular route and I was sure it was going to be working out, but it never did. And you feel so deflated after you're pursuing one particular area and then it just doesn't work out. So having that team, that network to go with, friends, is so critical. So thank you for your advice for our students. I think we're about ready to open up for questions. So I'm going to turn this over to Christopher Ortega, who will give us some instructions.
All right, thank you so much. So in the chat area, you see that there are instructions. If you go to the participants tab, you can use the raise hand function and we will make sure that you can ask your questions. So we'll give everyone a moment to kind of get through that, process through that. While we are waiting, we do have a question that was submitted ahead of time from those of us that are here. Dr. Akins, what preventative foods and vitamins would you recommend?
So this is a really interesting area of study, and I think that's an active area of research. I think in general, what we're seeing with diseases like COVID are that the better health you're in, the less likely you're going to have severe or complicated outcomes. So there are significant comorbidities associated with poor diet that are making COVID more severe, and other diseases. Classic is influenza as well. And so having a whole health approach is definitely quality. I'm not aware of any significant data pointing to a vitamin or a diet that is preventative for this infectious disease. I know there's a lot of information about vitamin D, which is a great vitamin, but those are definitely questions that are great to follow up with your physician, because everyone has individual healthcare needs, and depending on who you are and what your health background, health history is, there could be a different flavor or assortment that would be right for you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, so again, we will if anyone has a question. Also, if you're having difficulty with the actual Zoom function of it, if you just want to wave your hand to the camera, we can also call on you that way. Because, sometimes I have difficulty getting Zoom to work out for me. But while it looks like we will, Susan Webster, do we have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Hi, thank you for being here and for putting this on for us. We really appreciate it. Can you explain to me the difference in the Pfizer and Moderna side effects that people are having? I've been hearing, my mom recently had the second dose of the Moderna, and it was a little rough, not too bad. And then also the upcoming one-shot vaccine. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Sure. Great question. Thank you. So in general, we're seeing some differences between the mRNA vaccines, so Pfizer and Moderna, as far as the elderly over 65 or under 65 cohorts in the early phase trials. Classic side effects, fever, malaise, and general unwell feeling are all classic immune responses to vaccines and expected immune responses to vaccines. Early on, there were some information about particularly Pfizer generating anaphylaxis to people who had, individuals who had pre-existing allergies and carried an EpiPen. But to my knowledge, all of those are resolved and didn't require hospitalization. So as more people become vaccinated, we're getting larger N numbers to evaluate. And I don't think that there's a huge disparity between the Pfizer or Moderna mRNA-based vaccines. It does appear that, and so injection site redness, all of those things are classic vaccine-related side effects and expected. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the one shot is the one you're referring to now, is a different platform. It is an antigen adjuvant platform. And that data has a smaller N, but it does look like it might have slightly more severe pain, redness at the injection site, fever. It's certainly not enough to take it off the market, certainly not enough to not take it when it's available. Although I worked on the Moderna study, the first available vaccine to me was Pfizer because we work on the virus in the lab. And so our institute, along with the hospital, was able to provide us the vaccine. And I also, on my second dose in particular, and I think that's what a lot of people are experiencing, swollen lymph nodes, just extreme, not fever, but fatigue for a few days. I think some of it is emotional, right, as we are working through our pandemic feelings. But it's also definitely like the swollen lymph nodes in particular are classic. Your immune system is robust and mounting a response. And it makes perfect sense that the second time it would be higher or more, you'd feel more of a response. I think we'll need more vaccinated individuals with the J&J one shot to really do a proper comparison between the mRNA and the protein adjuvant style for this particular application. There's loads of data on protein adjuvant that surely will be assessed, but in this particular case, I think we need slightly more to do a proper comparison.
I have one more question, if you don't mind. So
Yep,
our
please.
Pharmacy Alumni Board President and Pharmacy Alumni Board Immediate Past President are both employees of Genentech, and they got in a bit of a debate about how long you should wait after you've had COVID to get the vaccination. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So as an immunologist and someone who actually studied the contraction of an immune response, I have strong feelings on a theoretical level. But again, there's definitely situational considerations for individuals with different comorbidities or health histories. In general, it seems like people are getting their vaccine quite close post resolution or during COVID infection. But what your immune response does is it generates a huge set of active cells. And once that antigen or infection wanes, so does the number of cells. And so if you apply more antigen and adjuvant in this hyperimmune context, you're probably not building a better response. You're actually probably driving it down. So to wait until it's more resolved, then you can activate the memory cells, the population that survives the contraction, and reactivate them in a more controlled and less inflamed situation. And we actually think that that helps drive better memory and a more robust response overall. So in general, once you're feeling better, we like to say 2 to 3 weeks after that is probably a good period of time. Again, that's a theoretical concept, and physicians are much more in tune with individual health histories and needs, and what's your exposure risk, and is there something we think the vaccine can help you with more proximal to your illness. So that's certainly not universal, but that's how we think about vaccine responses. That's why we design 21 days apart between 21 to 28 days between vaccines as well, because we want that immune response to contract before we immunize again. So it's a very similar study design to an infection and a vaccine for a lot of us who study immunology. That's a great question.
Thank you very much.
All right, and I believe Mike Clockey, did you have a question? Would you like to unmute yourself?
Sure. Hi, Sasha. How are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm well, thank you. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. In classroom situations, whether it's at University of the Pacific with 15 to 20 students in a class, or say a second grade with 25, how do you think things are being handled from a classroom situation, and what either concerns or do you have, or do you think it is being handled well?
I think the most disservice we can do to the general community is not have these open, robust discussions, and both on a state level and a national level. And I think that not leaning into experts is where we're going to get in a lot of trouble. I think that there are people who have expertise on aerosol biology and ventilation. I think that our children need to be in school and being educated, and I think that's a real huge priority. And I think that teachers in particular who want to receive the vaccine should be highly prioritized, because that's a huge part. The ripple effect is magnified, given that children stay home. A parent generally needs to care for them during their school period, and that affects subsequent work. So I totally understand the economic aspects and the burdens on parents and the burdens on teachers to work from home and trying to engage their students over video. Not to mention, the disparities of education for people who need enhanced learning environments. This is a really sad time, and I think that the biggest issue I have is the lack of a clear plan. And I think we could all critique a plan easier and really weigh in on how to best implement it if it was clearer and rolled out in a fashion a little bit differently. I think the CDC is catching up a bit. There are more CDC guidelines for classrooms as far as ventilation, spacing. Do I think it's rational to expect 4-year-olds to stay 6 feet apart? I don't. So I think also measuring your expectations with reality is important. We don't know how children will be affected by COVID long term. There is indications that they might be less susceptible, right, to infection. But I think most public health professionals understand the need to educate, but there's also definitely a fear of the unknown and not putting children or teachers in a situation where, because we didn't know, we had a major error. I think the school debate is one that will come to the forefront rapidly. I think with more vaccines and more rollout, it's going to ease up a little bit, because I think the teachers who do want it, it'll be available. But I think for a few, maybe 6 more weeks, we're going to be talking about it a lot. But we've definitely done our students and children a disservice by not prioritizing that. Good question.
Thank you so much for that. And we actually have a great follow-up question that was submitted earlier. What is the science community doing, if anything, to ensure vaccine equity across all communities and income levels?
Yeah, so it's not just the scientific community, but the medical community. In particular, Black physicians have been doing an incredible job of reaching their communities. because of, a lot of distress among the medical community. I think there are zillions of physicians really stepping up and stepping outside of the office to really do more of the little piece of what I'm doing to their neighbors and to their communities. And I think that's what's really going to swing people to buy in, get their questions answered in a comfortable setting from someone they trust. And so that's the local layer of vaccine equity. Beyond that, so I work for a hospital setting, and one thing I said early on is, when we talk about our healthcare professionals in hospitals, we're not just talking about physicians and nurses. We're talking about the service workers. We're talking about the staff at the front, the security. We're talking about translators. We're talking about the people who are cleaning rooms. We're talking about the people working in the cafeteria. So all of those people are healthcare professionals in supporting the healthcare infrastructure. If you only count physicians and nurses, you're missing people who have an exposed setting where those susceptible people are still really susceptible to disease, right? And so that's another kind of more local layer. The more national and global layers are that there are some nations that have yet to receive one vaccine. And it's difficult in the United States to think about over 1 million doses. 1 million people have received at least one dose, so that's about 13%. 400,000 are fully vaccinated, that's about 5% of the population. So of course, we need more. And that's more local. But to think about areas like South Africa that have, highly contagious variant circulating and no vaccine available is difficult. We're not going to be taking our international vacations anytime soon unless we really start thinking about vaccine equity and availability of that. There are institutes working on that. COVAX is one, CEPI is another. And so I do think that the vaccine community and the scientific community are working on global vaccine equity. And I think, again, as more doses are available and more tools in our toolbox become available, right? So to date, today, actually, the Johnson & Johnson received FDA emergency use authorization. And so again, that's just one more piece that's going to help vaccinate the people who want to be vaccinated across the US and internationally. So yes, it does seem sometimes like we've been screaming into the void about that for a while. And again, it's just, there's been no clear plan about where those vaccines are going to go, because obviously the high-income countries are going to be able to purchase more faster, which is a classic problem beyond vaccines, but particularly acute to think about now in the context of a global pandemic, and how people in different parts of the world and their health equity dramatically affects us and our lives, and how we're going to continue to live our lives, whether that's here or on vacation, and what we can get done. Can we have scientific conferences again? Can we meet in person to exchange ideas? Or are we going to continue to do virtual meetings because not all of our communities, our global collaborators are vaccinated? I think we're talking about it a lot. And I'm hoping that as more vaccines become available and more platforms for vaccines become available, it's going to really help, particularly the one dose, particularly the inexpensive vaccine style.
All right, thank you very much for that question. I have another question from the chat. Will the new versions of the virus succumb to the vaccine?
A great question. We're testing that all the time. So far it does seem like some of the variants are less neutralized by immune responses generated by the available vaccines. That's not to say they're not neutralized. There is some reduced efficacy, but it's not nothing. And so just as a reminder, the FDA was ready to approve any vaccine over 50% efficacy. We're all incredibly spoiled now because mRNA came and knocked it out of the park, right? 90 something. So we're all thinking that's the benchmark. That is not the benchmark. To have a vaccine still supply 60% efficacy, 40% efficacy against some of these variants is going to do a job. It's still going to help. It's not nothing. And don't think the scientific community isn't hopping on that as well. I have great collaborators who are working on a different mRNA vaccine that is going to tailor more towards the variant. So Moderna is looking at boosting with a spike matched to the variant as well. So it could just be a matter of receiving a boost if those circulating more highly contagious variants reach your community. So all of those things are real. I think the better thing to think about is reducing community transmission, because then you have less circulating variants and less opportunity for variants to arrive, right? So the less that it's around, the less chance it has to mutate. It needs the body to get in and mutate. So the better we do kind of controlling and beating back community transmission, daily case rates, the more effective our vaccines are going to be, and the sooner we're going to get out of this and not need repeated boosts for more vaccines that could escape. There is absolutely a chance that accumulation of mutations could induce or could more significantly reduce efficacy of these vaccines and the immune response. We haven't seen it yet, but it can happen. So I think there are a lot of things. The more surveillance we have as well of circulating variants, the better. And there are some nations doing incredible jobs. There's some states doing an incredible job. It takes a lot of infrastructure to sequence viruses. So it's also more special than just your run-of-the-mill hospital testing. So it's difficult. That's a difficult thing to do for the number of cases we have now.
Okay, excellent. So we have a question from Kathy Pietanza. If you're able to unmute yourself, it looks like via text only, so I'm not able to call in. So I will go ahead and read that for you. Are there any other companies such as Innova besides the 3 in the news that are working on a COVID vaccine, and what is their status?
Yeah, great question. There are great charts. You can look for COVID vaccine pipeline. There are literally hundreds. I work with a great company, some of my colleagues who, again, teach me everything I need to know about virology, called HDT Bioscience. They're working on an mRNA vaccine. There are folks in Texas working on protein-adjuvant vaccines. There are a lot of vaccines coming, because the idea is we might need more supply. And if supply is an issue and you can get more vaccines through the authorization process, you have more available. So there are a lot of companies working on it. Some outside the box, right? So some oncology groups are also repurposing kind of their tools and thinking outside the box. I mean, we'll see how the vaccine community kind of fares. Oh, thank you. So vaccine candidate tracker in the chat. There's some really gorgeous infographics to that. But we'll see how the community fares, because there are a lot of people who've really switched gears. Our TB program has continued, so we're not going to just stop and have to pick up again. But there are certainly some teams who have done that, and we'll see how their long-term science fares. We can't all study coronaviruses forever. There are people who've been studying coronaviruses for decades. So they're the specialists, right? But we'll see. I think everyone stepped up to the plate to really throw everything up that we have at this to get it under control. And yeah, I'm confident that there will be some high quality next gen vaccine candidates coming out by the end of summer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And so before I turn it back over to Provost Pallavacini, I did have a question about the vaccine tracker. I actually saw that you had posted that on your Twitter. Are there other places that people can follow you and follow any of the information that you are sending out?
Sure. Yes. So I have Twitter, which is great. And I have an Instagram account. It's private, so you have to request to follow me. And part of that is because it's in non-pandemic times, just my family viewing my content and my children, my son. So that's why I keep it private. In particular, women in science get harassed online quite a bit. And so I've made that decision to keep my account private. But if you do request to follow, I will accept. So my account, and I think they're going to put it in the chat, is at slarsen1219. And what I do is I save highlights to the top of the Instagram account, and so you can go back and kind of follow. So when new vaccines become available through emergency use, I kind of summarize that information. I offer a lot of opportunities to ask questions, and I get a lot of direct messages. This is my health condition. What do you think I should do? And so we kind of talk about the pros and cons. I do a lot of research, and you work through it. I usually send them back to their physician, but I say, these are the questions you need to be asking for your particular health condition. And here's where you need to go to see what phase you're in and when you're going to be available. The other thing that I like to do is help people work through their vaccine hesitancy. So one of the things I like to say is vaccine hesitancy isn't an excuse to spread misinformation, and vaccine confidence is an excuse to bully people. So you have to meet people where they are, and that's what I'm trying to do on Instagram for my small bubble of people, because they know me and trust me. But what are the benchmarks you want met as far as safety, as far as number of people vaccinated, to feel safe in your confidence in your choice to get a vaccine? So setting a number and deciding what safe means to you are tangible ways to work through your idea of what's a safe vaccine. So those are the kinds of things we talk about.
Thank you, Sasha. It is, really heartwarming that not only you're doing this, but you are responding to people who are reaching out to you with all kinds of questions, and that you're taking time on it. And time is precious for everybody. So I think there are many people, I'm sure, who are very grateful to you for what you're doing. So is there any other piece of advice that we've missed that you would like to share?
I think that in the context of the pandemic, there have been a lot of essential labels thrown on different people and different jobs. And I think it's important to remember we're all essential in our communities for one reason or another, and not to feel less than, or like your research or your particular area of the world is not influenced by you. We're all driving an impact. This will not last forever. And we need everyone to stay engaged in what they're doing and why they're doing it, because everyone is really genuinely essential to somebody or some small area of the world. And so don't get bogged down by where we are, and it won't last forever. And we're doing everything we can, really everything we can, to get out of it. I mean, the vaccine community is really working together and very hard to get past the pandemic stage we're in.
Thank you. So, I think we're all aware, and you are as well, Sasha, that we have a campaign. It's called Leading with Purpose. And it is, I think, during these times more important than ever for people to be able to identify their purpose, articulate it, live towards it. So could you share your purpose in one sentence?
Sure.
One sentence.
Sure. I wrote it down to make sure I said it correct. I think my purpose is to reduce the health burden of infectious diseases globally and help individuals make informed health decisions.
Fantastic. And you're doing exactly that. And your career starting at Pacific has led you to being able to do that, obviously, very effectively. So, Sasha, we couldn't be prouder of one of UOP grads. So proud of what you're doing. I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with us, and for all those that who have taken time to listen. Thank you for participating. So have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you again. Take care.